it's about knowing how to kind of who to talk to, how to debrief that, and not judge other people for not having been through those things.
Hi, welcome to the WEM podcast. I'm Mark Hannaford, the founder of World Extreme Medicine. If you're a doctor, nurse, paramedic, in fact, any healthcare professional with an adventurous and curious mind, then this is the podcast for you. This morning, we're talking to Erin Kilborn, a doctor with absolutely masses of humanitarian deployment experience, primarily with Médecins Sans Frontières. And we're going to be talking to her about her motivations, about the ups and downs of the work that she does, and also how medics wanting to follow a similar career pathway might be able to do so. It's my very great pleasure to introduce to you Erin Kilborn. Erin, it's really, really good to get you on the line, live from Gaza, on your mission with Médecins Sans Frontières. We feel extremely lucky to be able to speak to you today, because I know you're really busy over there, and also you've got such a busy life going on different missions and your clinical career. But could you give us a quick 5 minutes to just talk through your incredible career in humanitarian medicine and medicine per se, and let us know a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Hi, Mark. Thanks very much for inviting me to chat to you today. It's an absolute pleasure. So I feel very blessed to be able to be here. I think part of it is a bit of luck, and a lot of it's a lot of hard work as well. I've always wanted to work with MSF, so that's one of the driving forces for me to going into medicine in the first place, which is a bit cheesy and it's a bit romantic, this idea that you want to work, with a humanitarian organization. I think it is something that lots of young doctors and medical students really dream about. I was quite inspired to do that, kind of even before realizing I wanted to be a doctor, because I've always kind of I was made aware of this organization when I was quite young. I was maybe a teenager, and I heard about, the fact that you could combine this, love for travel and to helping people by being a doctor, but also going to interesting places in the world and places where people don't really have access to healthcare. And I think for me, one of the major driving forces is that it's, I'm very aware of how privileged I am, not just because of where I grew up, but also with, my family background. I've got a family who's very supportive of allowing me to go on these crazy missions and go to, places that most people would sort of hesitate to maybe go to. And even at a very young age, I was 17 when I first left home for an entire year to go to Sri Lanka and work in a children's orphanage with a small charity. And that for me was probably the most formative experience and concretely defining the next few years for me, because it really made me realize that medicine was the path I wanted to follow, because I saw a lot of need, and I saw that there was something, okay, well, if I'm in this position where I can learn and I can be in a place in the world where you have a really good quality education, and I can take part in that and I can benefit from that, then I want to be able to use those skills and that knowledge and use that in a way that actually provides healthcare to other people, and also teaching and training. So it's an ongoing thing that you give. It's not just that individual care that you offer to individual patients, but it's also the support that you give to the other staff that you work with as well. And that's the beautiful thing. So I did, when I came back from Sri Lanka, I started my studies in Glasgow University. And throughout that time, any chance I got to go and do an adventure, I took. So I spent a couple of electives going to India, comparing and contrasting the private and public healthcare systems, and that was really eye-opening. I realized the quality of healthcare in India, if you have money, is phenomenal, and if you don't have a good family support system, it's not great. So you're really kind of left to your own devices, and that's really very, very difficult. And there's this huge contrast in places like that. And I spent some time in Kenya as well, in my final year of medical school, and that was where I was first kind of confronted with people living in really, really tough circumstances. We were working in a project in Kibera, which is one of the biggest slums in that part of the world, and it was a sort of charity organization that provided a clinic and free healthcare for patients with TB and HIV, and they had a small maternity unit there. And we were doing home deliveries of, medicines and food and so on with another organization. And, it's amazing when you see people don't just sort of live and get by in these places, they don't just survive, but they can actually thrive. And what really struck me was going into people's homes and bringing them these food parcels. And as soon as you arrive, it was this sort of humility of, I was really humbled, really, because people were very generous. They had so little, and yet the first thing they want to do is offer you a cup of tea or offer you some food or offer you the one chair that they had in their house, to sit on. And I just thought, my goodness, it really puts things into perspective. And it's just been accumulation of experiences like that that's really led me to really be where I am today. After medical school, I did some tropical medicine studies in Belgium. And so it's equivalent to the diploma of tropical medicine and hygiene that you can do in Liverpool or London. So in Antwerp, they have the Institute of Tropical Medicine. And it put me in touch with some really incredible people, and including MSF. They come and they headhunt students that graduate from these organizations, because you need to have a little bit of knowledge of these weird and wonderful diseases that you can get in funky places in the world. Because it's not just obviously everything else that you see in the UK, like diabetes and heart disease and trauma, but that you're going to have all these other communicable diseases on top of that. So it's being able to kind of pick out what you're dealing with, and sometimes it's multiple things at the same time. So it's important to have an understanding of that. And then my path kind of took me towards the sort of expedition medicine world, because as I came back from that experience, I was thinking about MSF, and I knew that I still wasn't in a position to be qualified to go with them. I was still a very junior doctor, and I came and did this expedition and wilderness medicine training course in Keswick. So this would have been in 2011, I think. And it put me in touch with Raleigh International. So I went off with Raleigh as an expedition medic in Borneo, and spent 3 months with them in the jungles. And that was really good fun. Again, a massive learning opportunity, learning about how to kind of prepare for working in kind of resource limited setting. It was about learning how to communicate with the radios, all that kind of stuff. And, like thinking on your feet, working with young people, and a mix of very privileged kids and also people from less privileged backgrounds, and some people from the local community. So again, this very interesting dynamic, and learning to communicate with different people from different environments. And that can be quite challenging, even in those kind of circumstances where essentially it's a gap year charity. So it's not like you're dealing with people who are in vital life circumstances, but there can still be major challenges, and it's all relative. What may seem like a minor thing to you, to a kid who's just left home at the age of 17 and never been abroad before, camping in a jungle and coming across leeches and things like that, that's a really big deal. So not minimizing those kind of experiences for them is also quite important. But, you learn a lot as you go along. When I came back from that experience, I got involved with a local emergency department who offered me a chance to work as a clinical fellow with them. And then during the course of that year, I did lots more kind of training. And at the end of it all, applied to go with MSF. And so in 2013, I left on my first mission with them. And that was in Haiti as a burns doctor for 6 months. And then following that, I've done another 2 missions up until this one. I spent 6 months in CAR in Central African Republic, working in a trauma center and dealing with victims who had various injuries from trauma or surgical emergencies because of the war, but also victims of sexual violence. And that was an incredibly challenging time for me in many ways, personally and professionally. And then when I came back from that, I spent a bit more time in the NHS, again, going through the kind of training things. I've kind of dipped in and out of traditional training pathways. But I've allowed myself a bit of flexibility to be able to keep on going on with the humanitarian stuff, because it's not really easy to do that within the NHS structures and with the training systems that we have to date. None of the things that you do overseas currently are recognized and count towards your training. There's very few training posts that will give you that opportunity. And it's something I hope that maybe we can change moving forwards, because there's so many things that you gain from these experiences that are completely relevant to the work that you do in any healthcare setting. Then prior to Gaza, I also spent about 6-7 weeks in Syria, and that was in 2017. And that was just after the city of Raqqa had been kind of taken back over again, and ISIS had been sort of kicked out. There were a lot of refugee camps, and we were in Kobani, which is in the kind of Kurdish capital in the north, mostly supporting an emergency department with a small surgical unit. Very complex politically. I think it still is in that area. And it's probably the most complex context I've ever been in. We had a couple of, there was a lot of very difficult moments on that mission, even though it was so very short. It was an incredibly intense one. But from a human perspective, I think it was probably the one that, and from the team that I was with, it was probably the one I enjoyed the most in terms of the kind of team members that I was with, just probably because it was so intense. We became very close very quickly, and I think we did a lot of good work. And then, I've been in Gaza since February of this year. So I'm here for one more month after this, and I should be starting back up in the NHS in August for my last 2 years as an A&E registrar before I finish.
I think we're just going to have to pick 2 or 3, but there is a whole raft of stuff there. So let's, what I want to, I think, concentrate on is, one, imagine we're talking to somebody who would like to emulate your career, sort of what your tips to them would be, what advice you would give to your 20-year-old self. It's the relevancy and the skills that doing humanitarian, extreme medicine, expedition medicine gives to you as a clinician, that then is taken back to your everyday clinical life, and what makes you a better doctor. Because there is so much in that introduction I'd like to highlight as an illustration to people that actually, and I think it seems quite glamorous looking from the outside. I know when people have talked about my expedition career, and when people talk about expedition, it sounds very glamorous. You're going to exciting places, you're with generally very cool people doing incredible stuff. But actually the reality, of course, is much more mundane. It's much tougher at times. You feel a much greater sense of isolation, which comes as a surprise to a lot of people. When you're in the immediacy of the situation, you can peer group review with the people around you. How do you, or are you able to leave that issue there, or do you bring it with you? How do you deal with that issue when you're by yourself, and when you're not so busy and your mind has that opportunity to spin around sometimes, something which is quite difficult?
I mean, that's a really good question, Mark, and I think I'm still learning. I think it's something that I'm still working on, and I think it's something that you continue to develop throughout your career, whether it's in a kind of well-organized healthcare service where things can also go wrong sometimes, or whether it's in a really challenging environment, which is really pushing you to the limits of your comfort zones and really pushing you physically and psychologically, emotionally, all those things. I think really important is, when you mentioned already, is peer support. So it's your team who are on the ground with you at the time. There sometimes will be differences of opinion, but I think being able to talk them through with the people there and really kind of brainstorm things and try and digest it in the moment, like the kind of hot debrief, I think that's really important, because it helps you to kind of tackle some of those initial feelings that you have head on. But I think you're right, as time goes on and you let things cool down a bit, there's other questions that will come up, and you need to be able to have a way to ask those questions and sort of verbalize them, I think externalize them, because if you continually internalize that, it does have an impact on you. And I think it does change you. And I think that's important to realize that too, because if you're going to go into this line of work, you have to, I think it takes a certain type of person, because you have to understand that you will always be tested, right? And you'll be tested in any healthcare environment, certainly. And it just is a tough place to work as well. People also see difficult things, and burnout is something that happens there too. But I think that one thing that MSF certainly has gotten quite a bit better at over the years is offering psychological support to their staff, and anybody who comes back from a war zone has to do a debrief with the psychological cell. So you speak to a psychologist when you come back, and you discuss the mission and any kind of particular issues that came up from that. MSF UK then also has an interesting system where they have a sort of volunteer network, so that somebody who is experienced MSF but is currently based in the UK but has field experience and knows a bit about what that feels like, they'll give you a call maybe a month or so after you're back home, and just do a pulse check and say, hey, how are you? Do you want to talk about it? Like, tell me your experiences. And the nice thing about that is that you're not forced to. You can say, no, thank you. That's okay. But I don't want to talk now, but maybe call me again next month. And the nice thing is that, sometimes your own friends and family are not the best people to talk to, because you come back from a mission, occasionally the question they'll ask is, oh, how was your trip? Guys, it wasn't a holiday. and that's, yeah. Yeah. And you also don't want to be the killjoy at the party who's like, oh, and this one time when I was in Syria, or, oh, and this one time when I was in Bungie. And I know that, that's a risk because you want to so much tell people about these experiences that you've had. People have a very finite attention span for that. It's only certain types of people that will be interested. And eventually, you also need to be careful that you don't also judge the people around you for not having been through the same hard stuff that you have. It's a bit like that, like there's a well-researched experiences from the military as well, that kind of post-traumatic stress, sort of when you come back from being on tour somewhere. I mean, humanitarian work's not so dissimilar because you're also in pretty tough environment. You might be seeing high mortality rates because of something like Ebola or another type of pandemic. It could be because of trauma injuries from war. It could be just that the sort of living circumstances that you're yourself in are really challenging. When I was in Bungie, there was 20 of us living in a hospital corridor with two showers and 4 toilets. I mean, that's not easy, and it's loud all the time, and everybody always knows your business. So it's about knowing how to kind of who to talk to, how to debrief that, and not judge other people for not having been through those things as well. It's about knowing how to kind of who to talk to, how to debrief that, and not judge other people for not having been through those things as well.
You cross the border or you travel on a plane, and then all of a sudden your reality is so completely different to what it was, sometimes even just an hour before. And that's always taken me by surprise. And I can understand, especially when you guys are coming back from a humanitarian mission, and when people are coming back from a conflict zone. You bring that experience. You haven't de-escalated your mind. You're still in that experience, but actually you're shopping in Tesco's in the middle of London. It can be extremely surreal, and it's not surprising some people find themselves off kilter, to be honest.
Yeah, I actually think that kind of reverse culture shock is sometimes even more, I was going to say frappant, but that's French. It's even more striking in a way than like when you first arrive. Like, so when for example, when you step off the plane in Central Africa, right? The heat hits you like a wall. You step out the plane, it's like, okay, I'm here. And you start sweating. Oh, you smell the earth, and like everything is a bit different. Mosquitoes are there, they're chewing on your ankles, and you're standing in this long passport queue and you're kind of sweating from everywhere. and you're kind of, but you sort of think, okay, well, this is kind of part of the excitement. It's that exotic thing. And then when you come home, and also you've been a kind of exotic creature where you've been like here, I can't go out in the street without having kids following me. And like people are, saying, hello, how are you? What's your name? What's your country? Eventually they'll say, I love you. Then they'll maybe say, fuck you. And then they'll maybe say things like, oh, corona, corona, corona. And like, that's about, the extent of the English they know. So, I'm having to get used to sort of being like a local celebrity because I look very different, and that attracts attention, even if I'm culturally aware in the way that I dress when I go outside, right? Then, you come home, you go to the supermarket, nobody cares who you are. No, you don't look any different. Nobody's going to look at you. And that's a really weird thing. And you think, what's wrong? And suddenly you're struck because you've got more than one choice of toothpaste. And you're just like, I don't know how to do this. How do I choose my toothpaste?
And it's when they say, so what have you done recently? And you actually think, you slip, and you tell them what you've been doing, and they say, are you sure you want these peaches, or do you want those? And it's like, no, you completely missed what we're talking about here. But I mean, along with the cases that might stay and haunt you, which every clinician will have, and also the difficulty of operating in the environment that you're in, that also, and I think this must be the reason why you do it, it's also remarkably rewarding. I mean, are there any particular cases or individuals that stay in your mind as being the moment where you think, crikey, that's why I do what I do?
There's so many. It's hard to choose from. So one that was quite dramatic, and I'll forever in the day be just so impressed by our surgeons, and also just by this patient's, I don't know, physiology and anatomy, how he managed to survive it. I don't know. He's a young guy in Bungie who I was actually in the process of doing an interview. So I was, not in the emergency department. I was interviewing some new doctors to come and join our team. And I kept getting phone calls from the A&E nurse supervisor. And I thought, why does he keep phoning me? And eventually he arrived at the door, and he knocked on the door, and he opened the door, and he said, Dr. Erin, I'm really sorry, but can you please come to the emergency department? I said, Cyril, is it really an emergency? And he said, it's an emergency. Are we running? He said, we probably should. I said, okay, off we go. So we ran down to the A&E department, and there was a guy lying on the trolley with the team effectively standing around him in a semicircle, just looking at him going like, what do we do? And this young lad, I mean, he was sweating and he was sort of looking up at me, and all he had was a couple of sterile swabs across his chest like this. And he had a blood pressure cuff on his arm, and a nurse that was just sticking an IV line in him. And I stuck on a pair of gloves and I went over and I said hello to him. He was chatting to me, so he was mentating and his airway was okay. But I knew he had something going on with his chest. And I lifted up these swabs, and he had a massive open injury on his chest. And I could see his lung and I could see his heart. He wasn't bleeding particularly much, but he had basically been on a motorbike and gone into a pothole and then just like smashed down onto the handlebars. So he had like a crush injury to his chest here. So his ribs are all broken apart here. And it was a mess. And so I radioed up to, I had some analgesia for him, some pain relief and some medications. And I said, right, we need to get him up to the operating room. And I radioed up to the operating theater, and I said to the surgeon, this old French boy called Bernard, whatever you've got going on just now, it needs to end, because this takes way more priority. And I remember the stretcher bearer said to me, right, we're going to go up, because our OR, our operating room, was 3 floors up from the emergency room, but the elevator didn't work. So we had these burly big guys in orange jumpsuits who were kind of looks like something out of like Black Orange is the New Black. It's quite funny.
Yeah.
And they were the guys who would carry our patients up and down to the wards and so on. So they were going to carry this guy up the stairs to the OT, and they looked at me and said, what way should we go? Head first or feet first? I said, whatever way is fastest, just get him up there. And they operated, and Bernard said to me afterwards, very interesting. I don't know if you know of David Knott.
Yeah, of course.
He's obviously the war surgeon, very famous. Yeah, so he runs this course and he runs this course for surgeons to do different types of surgery for people going to war zones. Because our Bernard, lovely man that he is, he's a colorectal surgeon. So, chest and heart and cardiothoracics, that's not his forte, but he had done this course. So he's like, okay, well, I've got some skills. I've learned some things from this course. Let's go for it. And the amazing thing was this young lads, they washed it all out, tidied him up, managed to close it over. Luckily, there was no injury to the actual heart or lung. They stuck in a chest drain, because obviously he had a collapsed lung there. And about a week later, the drain came out. He was up and about, walking around. He was okay. And he went home, and
incredible.
He was okay. And I just love that, and he left he was so pleased. He left with a big smile on his face, and he was like, oh, do you remember that day I came to the emergency department and you guys all looked so scared? It's like, I don't know who was more scared, you or me, to be honest.
Remarkable.
Quite an amazing guy.
And that is what keeps you doing what you do, isn't it? It's the being able to make a difference to people's lives who otherwise would have either lost them or would be severely impacted by healthcare issues.
Definitely.
If you now this, I guess this is a two-part question, but it can also be a one-part depending on how you want to answer it. What would you have said to your 20-year-old self in terms of where you are now? If you could have done something when you were 20 that would put you in a better position, or you felt would have been some skills you would have liked to have gained earlier, or what would you say to somebody who's a early stage medic wanting to go into humanitarian medicine? What skills and experience should they gather around themselves to make them better prepared to do the work that you do?
Okay, so first of all, I want to just say that MSF is a big organization, and they don't just employ medics. And so for anybody who's non-medical out there are also posts for you potentially. I couldn't do the work I do without the logistics team that brings the supply of all the kit and all the stuff and the cold chain and the pharmacists and the pharmacy and everything that goes around it. Our admin teams who make sure that we're employing people who are working with us, because 80% of our staff are going to be local staff. We're not staffing these programs with the majority of people we're bringing from an international pool. So we are really helping to employ people locally where we are. So that's really important. And there's lots of different kind of backgrounds that you can have to come into it from that point of view. So I think that's something that's quite interesting. if you're going to come in as a medic, it doesn't really matter what your specialty area is going to be. We have obviously need for certain specialties in particular. So pediatrics, infectious diseases is very good background. Surgeons, obstetricians, gynecologists, anesthetists, emergency medicine, but also general practitioners and people who are essentially generalists, internal medicine, whatever. What I would say is that if you're going to do this kind of work, you really need to go at a point in your career where you feel really quite autonomous and you're happy to deal with some, emergency situations. And I'd say that you should wait at least a couple of years after your FY2, so that your second year of training in the UK, or whatever your equivalent is if you're in another healthcare system, get at least, I'd say, a year of emergency medicine under your belt, because that will help you to deal with sort of the unknown a little bit, because you don't have a list of patients where you know what's going to come in the door. It can be a little bit of anything. And that's something that's also helpful skill to have, is just being a bit on your toes and being able to be quite reactive. I think, mostly the medical staff now, they do ask as a prerequisite for you to have some training in tropical medicine. So the diploma of tropical medicine and hygiene is a good starting point. Again, if you're in the UK, there are other alternatives and there are equivalences that you can look at according to where you are locally. And I would definitely look at that, because it's I think it's now a prerequisite. Having another language is useful. It is not a prerequisite, but it is useful. And certainly the ones that they would focus on would be French, Arabic, Spanish. Russian is useful as well, because we have quite a lot of programs in some of the Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, those areas. So those things are absolutely helpful. What MSF will look for are people who are not only skilled in the medicine that they're going to be practicing, but it's also about your leadership skills, your people skills, and your ability to survive in areas that are pretty different from the ones that you've been at. And they will ask for you to kind of demonstrate that. And whether that's because you've done some expedition work, for example, which can very well prepare you for that, or whether it's because you've done some voluntary work, or you've traveled and stayed in other parts of the world, which are quite different from home. Those are things that are important, because you need to understand that how do you react when you're pushed, and how do you react when you're out of your comfort zone? And can you manage to be away from home and family, and maybe where the communication, obviously it's easier now because most places have Wi-Fi, but still there are some parts of the world that MSF operates where you may still only have a sat phone, right? And so it's only going to be once a week, if that. You can upload and download messages through the satellite phone, and that's going to be your contact. So, the other thing, for me here in Gaza, I know that family and friends have been sending packages, and normally they would be kind of shepherded over here by an expat who's coming into the field. But because Gaza's been quite shut down since the COVID pandemic, it's quite difficult to get access at the best of times. Now it's even harder. And so as a result, we haven't had as many people coming in. So nobody's had any mail, and we haven't had any new expats really arrive for a while. So, that's something to keep in mind too. You're the contact with your loved ones, and home comforts that people might normally send you, that they may not always get there. So those are I think things other than medicine. So yeah, I think certainly if you're, as I said, if you're in the UK system, finish your core training in whatever it is that you're doing, whether it's surgery, whether it's your acute care, specialties, or whether it's your core medicine, and then think about going after that. But that's a good kind of time to go, because you've done a couple of exams and you're kind of more on top of things. And MSF will also ask you to have done some of the trauma courses, so advanced trauma life support, your advanced medical life support. If you're going to be working with children, pediatric life support. That's all helpful.
And I'm not trying to plug our own conference here, but also attending events where there are other humanitarian medics, like the WEM conference, where you can learn from their experiences, but also share networks and opportunities. I think it's a good step forward for younger medics.
I'll plug your WEM conference for you then, Mark. I would say I went as a participant at the WEM conference. I think the first year it was running, and I found it incredibly inspiring. And this is even before I think I went with MSF. And I think it's an amazing event, because it really helps to showcase the breadth of what medicine can offer you as a career that's outside of a hospital or a clinic in a comfortable healthcare setting. And I think that if that's something that you're interested in doing, coming and speaking to the people who've been there and who've done that is a really helpful thing, because you can ask all your burning questions about how you get involved, but you can also ask the harder questions, because most of the people who speak at this conference are really happy and open to talk about not just the but also the things that are harder and more mundane. You will find some really interesting people who've done some really unusual things, and people are not afraid to tell you, and they're really usually happy to share the detail. Realistically, I'll tell you, I'm living and working in Gaza right now, and all my colleagues at home are saying to me, oh, be safe. I'm thinking, I'm probably more safe than any of you guys are right now. One, we have no community transmission of COVID as of yet. All the cases we've had have been found in quarantine, and so far there's only been one death, and it was a very elderly lady. Secondly, because of the COVID epidemic, politically, things are a bit calmer and more stable here because the government does not want things to explode and go crazy. So right now, there's not been lots of rocket fire and drones and violence and so on. So really, it's a very, touch wood, it stays that way, but it's a pretty calm time. And my everyday job really is a management job where I have a rota that I organize, and I ensure that our clinics are well staffed and running, and that there's no kind of hiccups that go on in the day-to-day activities with our burns patients and our trauma patients, and anything else that comes our way. So it's not that kind of, wow, it's so sexy to work with humanitarian medicine. In some ways, it's just another job. But it's just that the context that you're in that's like a little bit different. So I think that's the nice thing about these conferences is you meet people who've done these things, but they'll really tell you what it is. Like, they'll tell you how it is.
I think it's the reality. It's stripping away the glamour and making people aware of what the reality is, which is no less stimulating and interest once that glamour has been taken away. But it is the reality, and so it's educating people about what it is they're letting themselves in for. But because you don't want to attract people to this discipline who aren't going to be happy doing it. You want the people who are comfortable doing it. So
absolutely, yeah. And people will, there are sometimes mismatches also with MSF. I've worked with people in the field as well I've come across, and I just think, gosh, why are you doing this? And sometimes people do things for different reasons, of course, and it's not always about, and I'll put my hands up, right? Yes, there's this sort of altruistic, I love to help other people, I love to share my skills, I love to teach. So, but it's me saying, I love to share my skills, I love to teach, I love to travel. It's also quite selfish. And in many ways, we kind of do it for ourselves. Even though you're giving a lot and, you come away from an experience like this and you are knackered because it's not just the long hours that you're working, even if you do get a weekend. So, hey, it's Friday today because I'm in Gaza, it's my holiday. You do get a bit of time off, but, realistically, it is exhausting, and you are giving, but at the same time, like, you also get so much from that experience yourself. So, I mean, and it's not about having the kind of saving the world kind of idea, because let's be honest here, I'm not, right? I'm really not. I'm just one other person, and I'm part of a team here, and we're working hard and we're doing a good job with the work we do, but I am just one person. And actually, the GP doctors I work with here, they're the real heroes, right? One of my doctors, he's lived through 5 wars, right? Because he studied in Serbia and then he came here. So, like, for me, and he's one of the smartest people I've ever worked with. Like, he's a brilliant doctor. He is so calm and so cool, no matter what. And sometimes I lose my rag, right? I mean, you be realistic about where your limits are and so on. Fine, yeah, that's important. But at the same time, like, I have so much respect for my staff here. I really do, because they're the ones who really are, living and training and working in an environment that doesn't allow them really access out very easily to go and get better experience and training and so on. And yet they're such a smart group of people. One guy's just applied for a Fulbright scholarship, and I saw his application form and I was blown away. I just said to him, Dr. Erin, this is amazing. You are such a star. Like, you are going to have a glowing career regardless of whether you get this scholarship. But even like whatever I can do to help you do that, I will write you the most glowing reference, because you deserve it, man. You're a really good guy. You're a good doctor. You're a good clinician. And I think that if you get this opportunity, you're going to go really far. So go. And that's the thing that I love the most about it. But again, it's something I get back from it. I think you need to be honest about that.
I don't think there's any reason to hide that, isn't it? It is at the end of the day an exchange, and it's what makes you capable and happy to operate in those type of conditions. Because also, as you said, you're getting something back yourself. You're getting and then giving yourself a sense of purpose. And I don't think there's anything wrong with being quite open.
I think having a sense of purpose is probably one of the important things for the human experience and mind. I think it's one of the biggest causes of depression is when you lose your sense of purpose. Absolutely. And I think you can absolutely determine and define what that is for yourself. And it doesn't have to be lofty. Your sense of purpose could be that you are going to mow the lawn today and that is your purpose of this day, right? And that's fine. But it can also be that you really want to achieve something really big. And, you invest in that, you throw time and energy and resources sometimes at doing that. But then the rewards that you get back from that are huge. And whether that's spending a bit of extra time with a kid and their family to explain why it's so important to have, good nutrition and to, follow the dressing protocols for a bad burn and make sure that they get a skin graft and working through the kind of cultural barriers that exist. Here, for example, people are really afraid to let their daughters have a skin graft because they're afraid of increasing the scar tissue because of the donor site. So we've spent a lot of time with our health promotion team, for example, just like developing patient information leaflets, which for some of the population who are illiterate has to be very pictorial, but also has some writing, and it's just like that time that you spend with these resources that you create, and then the time that you physically spend with the family, like that's so important, but you get a better result that way and you get something back because that you've done a really good job when they finally accept that. And then you see that the result afterwards is that somebody who's got a beautiful skin graft and they've healed really, really well, and you get to discharge them from the clinic at the end of the day and they're going to have a normal, healthy, happy life after. That's why we do it.
And what are your plans for, what are you doing next? Where are you headed to after Gaza? Or, kind of what's your aspiration? Where are you headed?
That is the ultimate question mark. And if I could find an easy answer for that, I'd pay a lot of money. I think in the short term being the 2 years, I've still got 2 years of my NHS training left to finish my A&E jobs. So I'll be going back to Glasgow in August and finishing up my 2-year contract. I don't think my boss will be very happy if I ask him for more time out, although my boss here keeps on telling me, oh, but you're coming back, in a couple of months' time, we'll need you back for when COVID really hits hard. So, I think what I would love is if I don't really know where I'm going to be long term. If it is staying in the UK, what I would like to do is for future doctors in training, try and establish a way that we can help those doctors who go and do this kind of work get that recognized towards their training. It's ridiculous that when I go back, I'm going to have to put together some kind of tick box management portfolio when actually all I've been doing for the last 4 months on this job and my previous missions as well, a huge component of that is management. It's risk assessment. It's having a global view of an operation at an operational level to see what it is that we want to achieve here, what it is that we're, how are we structuring the healthcare, provision that we want to put in place? What is our goal here? What are the outcomes that we're achieving here? How do you measure those outcomes? It's about quality improvement. It's about ongoing audit processes. It's about ongoing teaching and training. One of the beautiful things that I've really been inspired by, and I hope to take forward with me as well, is that with a team for the first time ever, MSF is doing sort of telemedicine-based POCUS, which is point of care ultrasound training with the doctors here in Gaza. So I'm trained in EFAST, which is the kind of focused assessment of ultrasound in trauma. But we're adding on components because we have a very interesting cohort of patients here with osteomyelitis. And so we're looking at soft tissue scans to look at how can you determine how reactive or responsive the disease is according to the treatment it's had from surgery and antibiotics. Adding on cardiovascular lung components as well, so that if ever our team is working in a kind of COVID center, which is one of the things that we're setting up here, they can use ultrasound as a tool also to look at disease progression in patients without necessarily needing to try and get CT scans for everybody, because that's not going to be possible here, right? So that's a cool thing. We're doing this whole POCUS training program here, and that's something I want to hopefully continue with when I go back home. And it's something I've learned from a lot, and then being allowed to then teach that on to other people is just a really beautiful thing. And I've got a lot of support from a doctor in New York, another one in Barcelona, there's one in Germany. So video call and WhatsApp with them, and we have a telemedicine platform that we're using. It's brilliant. Using technology to kind of move forward and help people in places like Gaza where you can't necessarily go out and get education. I think that's the way forward. It's a really nice thing to be able to do for them.
And I think the COVID pandemic has pushed a lot of that technology and changed the way that people are working, and it's accelerated that whole progression. Certainly from the WEM side, we found that, and I imagine on a much bigger scale, that's also the case.
Yeah.
It will be great to sort of expand on this in a lot more detail when we do the WEM conference. Now, we don't know whether that's going to be a physical or a digital conference yet. We've yet to decide. But it would be great to get you back for that in end of October, to talk more about your experiences and inspire even more people to do the type of medicine that you're doing. But it's been fascinating to learn more about your personal background and the work that you're doing at the moment in Gaza. And to hear your stories from all over the world in terms of the missions that you've done, Erin. So thank you for giving us the time today, and wishing you great further stay in Gaza. I've never been, in fact, I have been to Gaza, but I've spent a lot of time in that area, and I know how remarkable the people are there. So I imagine you will be wanting to go back. But thank you very much for your time today, and it's been great speaking.